In today's lesson, I'm going to teach you how you can take a single line phrase like this and make it into a chord melody like this. So pick up your guitars and let's do this. Greetings jazz guitar gurus, my name is Jamie. I'm the founder of JamieHolroyGuitar.com, which is a blog, video lessons and podcast, all geared to helping you become a better jazz guitar player. And if you haven't done so already, then please consider hitting that subscribe button so you don't miss any future uploads. Alright, so in today's class I'm going to teach you a 3-step process which you can use to transform any single line passage you play into a tasteful chord melody. You can apply this to any single line phrase that you're working on or any jazz standards. So let's check this lesson out and I hope you enjoy it. But before we do, I'd just like to say that if you'd like to get a downloadable PDF with tab and notation for all these examples, that is available at my Patreon page, which is listed and linked in the description below. Let's do this. Throughout this lesson, I'm going to be referring to several jazz chord types such as drop 2 chords, extended chords and passing chords. So I'm going to take as read that you're comfortable with each of those. If you don't know what any of those are, then I highly recommend checking out my ebook Beginner Jazz Guitar Chords, which has in-depth explanations to each of these chord techniques. So let's go into the single line phrase. The phrase which I'm going to use is a jazz lick over a short 2-5-1 in the key of C. So that's D minor for half a bar, G7 for half a bar, and C major 7 for a full bar. The phrase sounds like this. Once more. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you don't already know that phrase, I highly recommend learning it. It's a bit of a jazz cliche, but for good reason. It's used several times in many jazz solos, so learn the phrase by itself if you don't already know it. Okay, so the first step in this process is to add some chords to the important notes. So the very first melody note here is an F natural, and we're going to be harmonising that with a D minor 7 chord. So this drop 2 D minor 7 chord will certainly do the job there. Now after that we have some scalic motion, and we don't really want to add chords to the rest of these notes because that'll be cumbersome and bulky to play. Okay, so the next part where we need to add a chord is when the progression goes to a G7 halfway throughout the bar. So at that point the melody note is in B natural, which is the third of a G7. So I'm going to use this dominant 7 flat 9 chord to harmonise that. So far we have this phrase. The next melody note that we're going to be dealing with is also a G7. Now we could get away with probably not harmonising this, however the melody note over the G7 is the note A flat, which is a flat 9, so we can use the same chord voicing down a minor third to capture that note as well. Okay, so far we have this. To finish off that bar we have a G natural, then we have the 7th, and then that falls to the C major 7 chord then. And I've already played the chord which I'm going to use to harmonise that. So over the C major 7 chord we resolve to the note E, which is the third of C major 7. So once again I'm just using this drop 2 chord. So the phrase altogether sounds like this. So that's step 1. Whenever you're learning any jazz piece or you want to harmonise any single line phrase, try and harmonise it in a basic way which is fluent, and it's going to give you lots of motion throughout the phrase. You don't want to harmonise every note because you're going to be battling with the guitar to try and play it. The second step is to create motion. Creating motion or movement on static points of the chord progression helps create interest on what would otherwise be perhaps a boring bar. So probably the most boring part of this chord phrase is when we're just going to that drop 2 C major 7 chord. So let's create some motion here by adding notes from the harmonised C major scale. So the harmonised C major scale, C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G7, A minor 7, B7, C major 7. Each of these will work as motion because you're playing notes which are diatonic to that scale. In this example, I've not used all of those because that would be a little bit much. I've just gone up to E minor, and E minor is a chord which is very much like C. So I'll play the phrase just so you can hear how this one sounds. Once more. So that's step 2, adding motion to static points within a chord progression. The third and final step is to add passing chords. You can approach any chord that you need to get to from either a semitone below or above to create interest within a phrase. So in this example, what I've done is I've approached the D minor 7 from a semitone below. So before, when we just started on the D minor 7, we had this. We now have. So that's the first place where I've added it. Then the second place is when we go on the last note of the bar of G7 there. I've harmonised that F note with a D flat major 7, which is obviously going to C major 7. So that's a semitone above C major 7. Okay, so the phrase slowly with the passing chords sounds like this. And now if I add motion on the static chord, the phrase will sound like this. So hopefully you enjoyed each of those phrases. I recommend that you apply these to any jazz standard that you're working on. For example, you could take Autumn Leaves, and the first thing you would do is obviously take the melody, the single line melody. So if I just take the first 4 bars of Autumn Leaves, step 1 to that was to add chords on the static points of the chord progression. So you could do this type of thing. A minor 7, D7. Next phrase, G major 7, C major 7. Alright? Now step 2 in the chord melody process was to make motion at static points. So this progression kind of slows down when it gets to that G major 7. So if you wanted to add motion there, we could go up the harmonised major scale again to get to C major. So step 2 of Autumn Leaves would sound like this. Step 3 is to add passing chords. So what I've done here is I've just harmonised the first 3 notes with passing chords that work with this progression. This sounds like this. So there's just one example on 4 bars of a common jazz standard. So I highly recommend that you do this with any jazz standard that you know. Take this 3-step process and apply it and see what kind of results you get. What do you think of this 3-step process? Has it been useful? Please let me know in the comment section below, and if you have any questions about any of the material, feel free to drop me a line. And a special thanks to my Patreons for supporting these lessons. Without you guys, none of these lessons would be possible. So thanks to you guys for supporting these lessons, and I hope to see you in the next class.